Hello and welcome to Tata Literature Live, the Mumbai International Lit Fest co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects and powered by Godrej. This session is presented by the British Council. Matt Haig is a renowned children's writer. He has sold over 3 million copies worldwide. His book, The Midnight Library, has been a bestseller and was recently made into a movie streaming on Netflix. In conversation with him, we have Shabnam Minwalla, the author of The Six Spellmakers of Doraji Street, a critically acclaimed book and winner of the River Kids Parents and Kids' Choice Awards. I'm curious to know what it is like to write for an audience so in touch with their imagination. Let's get started with this conversation.
Thanks so much for the introduction. And on my part, I want to say I'm really excited about this conversation because for many years, I was a volunteer in my children's school library, and I'd be shelving and pulling out your books and encouraging children to borrow them, and they would all come back and say, "Auntie, we loved it." So I think it's a special kind of joy meeting the person behind those books that I've known so well. And so a big welcome to
Thank you so much. And I can tell this is going to be a great chat. And I hear people love your books too, Shabnam. So yeah, this is a double honor. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this.
Thanks. So can we start out just by understanding how did you become a writer? How does one decide to be a writer and become one?
I've been one for quite a long time now. I'm 46 years old now, and I became a writer, well, a published writer when I was about 26. So about 20 years I've been a writer, and I never really had a normal job. I mean, I had jobs for a very short period of time, and then I wasn't very good at them, and then I gave them up. So I was selling things on the telephone. I worked in a wine shop. I did that, but not for very long. But I basically narrowed it down that the only thing I felt really confident doing was writing. So before I was a published writer of books, I was a journalist, and I wrote a little bit about boring things like technology and the internet and marketing and stuff in newspapers. And that got me used to sort of having the confidence to see my name on an article and think, oh, and then one year I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to write something that I really enjoy writing? And it coincided with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, Andrea. Her mother was really poorly with cancer. She got better, but she was really poorly for a while, and we had to move and be near her and look after her. So all of a sudden I had these very long days with not much happening and nothing to do and not much work. So I started writing a novel to keep me sane, basically. And that was it. And then I sent it off for agent and publisher, and didn't get very much money for it, but that set me on the path to being a writer. Yes.
So for a long time, you were a writer for adults' books. How did you move into the world of children's writing?
Well, years ago, I had an idea for a story set in Norway. This was a book called Shadow Forest in English. And this was clearly a children's story because it was a forest, it had trolls, it was two children. And so it was just the idea came to me for this tale, which was clearly a children's book. So with me, I don't think there is a massive difference always between my books for adults and books for children. It's just the idea tells you who it's for. So the actual experience of writing a book for children and writing a book for adults often doesn't feel that different. I mean, every book feels different, but two adult books can feel very different, and two children's books can feel very different. And sometimes a children's book can feel quite like you're writing an adult book. I must say though, even though I write for both, and I'm not just saying this because it's a children's event, I actually prefer writing for children. I think children are better readers in many ways, because when grown-ups normally talk about children's books. They're thinking of things you're not allowed to say. But I think it's the other way around. I think children, their imaginations are so wide that when you're writing for an adult, and if you want to put something that's fantastical or not of this world for an adult, you have to over explain, and you have to have a scientific explanation, and because adults, their imaginations, every year our imaginations get a little small. So with children, you can write about unicorns and trolls and elves and things, and it's not that they are believing these things are necessarily real, but they are so willing to go with the daydream, which makes them, I think, the perfect reader. So sometimes with children, they don't know every word that a 50-year-old knows. You know, a 7-year-old may have a smaller vocabulary, but their imaginations are so much bigger. And I think imagination is the key to reading and writing. So yeah, I think children actually beat adults as readers, certainly readers of fiction.
And the reaction to Shadow Forest was extremely positive, wasn't it? I mean, it just kind of was...
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it won a little prize in England, which was nice. It probably didn't do as well as my adult books at the time, but I really liked it. I really enjoyed writing it. And the longer my career's gone on, I realized that actually the best joy that can come from being a writer is in the writing. Not always. Sometimes writing is a chore, you know yourself. Sometimes when you're editing and editing and editing, it gets a bit boring and it feels like a job and work. But there's a moment for me, I don't know about you, but for me, when you're writing something that's new and you've still got the capacity to surprise yourself. You don't necessarily know what you're going to be writing, and that when you get lost in the imagination at the start and you get excited because no one's seen it and it's all fresh, I love that feeling. And that's always the same. And I had it a lot writing just children's stories, so I wanted to write more. So I wrote a sequel for that. I wrote another book about a boy who turned into a cat as well, called To Be a Cat. But then I gave it up for a little while because the books weren't doing that well. But then my son, Lucas, he asked me a question one day about what was Father Christmas like as a young boy, and I didn't have an answer. And I thought, oh, well, that could be a story. So you know, yeah, it's never planned. Like I flit about more than most authors in terms of children's book, grown-up book, fiction, non-fiction. I'm all over the place, but I try and go with the story I most want to write about.
Okay. And you don't have to switch mindsets or change the way you view the world in any way to do those jumps?
Well, a little bit, I suppose, but that's not because they're different genres. That's just because they're different stories. I suppose sometimes when I'm writing for children, it's more, the voice is slightly different. It's more like you imagine everyone sitting around a campfire and you're telling a story. I actually think that's good advice for all writing, though. If you're writing for fiction, sometimes it's good to forget that you're writing a book, to actually just remember you're communicating a story that could be spoken, that could be read, that could be watched, that could be heard. You know, you're communicating a story. That's essentially what it is. We fetishize books a lot, and books are wonderful, magical things. Books are great. But essentially, books are great because they're communicating a story. So I think sometimes you can get a kind of writer's version of stage fright, where you think, oh, I'm an author, so I have to write in a certain author way to do this. You know what I mean? And it's different to like writing an email or writing a text message. I'm an author, so I've got to, and I think it helps to shake that off, because when I've written my sort of worst books, or when I've written things I don't like, it's normally because I'm a bit nervous about being an author and wondering what I should write like, and a bit pretentious, and yeah, it doesn't feel very natural. So if you remember, you're just communicating and trying to communicate as clearly as possible, then I think, you know, that's the main thing.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
So It's incredible that from this one question that your son asked about Father Christmas, an entire 3-book series in a way was born. It's 3 books, right?
3 books, and then sort of like little spin-off books. So there was 3 books in the main story, and then some of the characters like the Truth Pixie and Mika the Mouse, they had their own books as well. But yes, it's a trilogy of 3 books, starting with A Boy Called Christmas, Girl Who Saved Christmas, Father Christmas, and me. Yes, so it all started with one question. My son couldn't get to sleep, and when he was 7 years old, he asked a lot of questions on a night, you know. Why are we here? You know, was it how long would it take us to drive to the moon? You know, lots of questions, and yeah, and so and when he asked that one, although I didn't have an answer, I thought, oh, you know, an origin story of Father Christmas, that would be good, and it would be fun to, you know, certainly like the European version of Father Christmas, to see how, you know, he collected and got all his things, like a sack, a hat. So yeah, that was.
So will you tell us a little about the story, not the spoiler bits, but just how you started? Because it's a terrible prospect in a way.
Well, even though it's A Boy Called Christmas, Christmas is just his nickname. The boy is really called Nicholas, and he is a woodcutter's son living in Finland. They're very poor. They're very hungry often, and then the father goes on a quest to the far north to find proof of magic, which would get him a big reward. But then the father goes missing, so Nicholas, who's staying with his horrible aunt Carlotta, who's really nasty to him, Nicholas, whose, you know, only friend in the world is a little mouse called Mika, he goes off on this quest to look for his father, and in looking for his father, he finds more than his father. He finds the magical kingdom of the elves and stuff like that, and it's about how he becomes acquainted with magic, and meets the elves and potentially becomes Father Christmas.
And a lot of the, you know, I read a bit of the book, and I found that a lot of the side characters, the quirky, odd little characters, added a lot of fun and humor to the tale. And how do you come up with these, you know, these smaller characters which have such distinctive, often crusty personalities? And
well, I love writing. Some of my most fun is when you've got a small character that you don't have to think about too much. You don't have to worry about what their childhood was like. You just add them in and have a bit of fun. The elves, lots of different elves. And my favorite character, though, in all the books is probably the Truth Pixie, because the Truth Pixie, she's great for humor, but there's a kind of sadness to her as well, because she literally has been cursed, and it is kind of a curse from childhood, where she has to tell everybody the truth. So, you know, and obviously telling people the truth is a good thing, but it can get you into trouble if literally anyone asks you anything and you have to blurt out everything about them, what she feels about them. And she's quite a naughty pixie, so she's got all this naughtiness inside her, but she has to be truthful. So she was probably the most fun to write. Mika the mouse is a bit of a cheeky mouse. He's good, and a lot of the elves too. And the reindeer are in it, but the reindeer don't speak.
And the Truth Pixie has her own books as well, right? Now,
Truth Pixie has her own books. She was just fun to write. And the problem with the Truth Pixie books, for some reason, I decided they should all be rhyming. So they're very, very long poems, basically, which can, you know, it's sometimes hard, especially when you're trying to use the simplest words imaginable to find the rhyming words. So that takes me a little bit of time sometimes. But there will probably be one. I think I've got one more Truth Pixie book in me before I get there. I like it.
Would you be able to do us a small reading from the Truth Pixie?
From the Truth Pixie, yes, absolutely. Well, this is from the first book called The Truth Pixie. And this is when she's just insulted a troll. And this big troll has thrown her so far, she has landed in a city full of humans, which is Helsinki in Finland. And yeah, she lands into this house, basically, where this girl is. So I'll read a few little pages. And as I say, it's a rhyming kind of poem. She drops through a window on the edge of town and sees a human in a dressing gown. The girl on the bed hugs a pillow patterned with foxes. She sits and cries in a room full of boxes. This is the room full of boxes, drawn by Chris Mould, the illustrator. Who are you, says the girl, and what are you doing? The Truth Pixie sighs. Is more trouble brewing? I'm the Truth Pixie, and I was hoping you'd ignore me, because I can't sing songs and I can't tell a story. Just as cats go meow and cows go moo, the Truth Pixie can only say things that are true. Far away is the home where I belong. I got thrown by a troll who found the truth too strong. I've upset 2 elves and a rabbit who hops. I hate this truth. It just never stops. I'm the most miserable thing you ever did see. I upset people just by being me. The girl smiles softly. I know the feeling. She looks sadly up to the ceiling. My name is Ada. It has 3 A's. We're moving house in just 2 days. There you go. So that's the Truth Pixie. And what I tried to do with the Truth Pixie is that although she's a fun character, there's always a little bit of a emotional stuff in her stories, and yeah, her lack of friends and how she helps other humans in need and stuff. So she's a good character. Right.
So, in fact, that is what I was going to ask you, because whenever I look at your books, the protagonists, many of the protagonists rather, are children in situations which can sometimes be uncomfortable, difficult, actively sad even. And why do you put the children in those positions, and does it in any way hark back to your memories of your childhood, or not even an active memory, but a feeling? Because we all felt in a certain way as children. I remember feeling acutely helpless in a world full of adults doing their own thing, and we were kind of pawns. So
yes, I think so. I think yeah. I mean, my childhood wasn't the most terrible childhood, but I remember having very intense feelings. I remember feeling lonely a lot of time. My parents both worked and they would come in late. I was a very anxious child. So I can remember, like, some of my biggest worries were, like, if my mum and dad had gone somewhere, like, to a party or something, and they'd say they were coming back at 6 p.m. and then they'd be back at like 8 p.m. For those 2 hours, I'd think they'd been, I don't know, eaten by wolves, had a car crash, you know, I just a continual anxiety and worry. I was a very intense child. Teachers often thought I was quite stupid because I'd have my mouth open and I'd just sort of, I'd sit in class like that. But just because there'd be so much going on in my head, I'd be staring out the window like blank, but be like this world going on. So I was kind of an intense child, and I didn't have much confidence. And like, I would not, you know, as a child, I wouldn't have said I wanted to be a writer because I would have thought I wouldn't have been able to be a writer. I didn't have any ambitions and stuff. So yeah, often the characters I write about are people who feel a little bit like an outsider. I wasn't, you know, growing up in England, I wasn't visibly an outsider, just normal middle-class background, but I often had that feeling of being different in my head. I think that's a common writer thing, isn't it? And what was the other part of your question? Because you asked me something at the start. I can't remember.
So do you actively create characters who are in these uncomfortable situations?
Yes, I think so. I think it's useful as well. I think it's useful, especially if they're narrating the story. If you've got a character who's looking at things from a different angle. Like, for instance, one of my books for grown-ups, which is probably one of the most me books I've written, is about an alien who possesses the body of this professor, and he looks like this normal man, and and it's called The Humans, and the idea is almost looking at the human species like we're a different species. Like, you know, when you get a nature documentary and it's about lions or, you know, jellyfish, you know, looking at humans like we're another species of animal. And because I feel one of the jobs of a writer is to always make us look at things we kind of already know but need reminding of. And I think we get so lost in our own human concerns that we sometimes don't see the bigger picture. So it helps to have a narrator who's a little bit different or outside things, to get that new angle to make observations in a natural way. So even with like the Christmas books, even with a book, he's a fish out of water because he's this lonely boy. So he's a bit of a fish out of water in the human world, but then he goes to the elf world where he's like the only one. So in a way, Father Christmas, although he's a happy character, if you actually think about what being Father Christmas would be like, it would be kind of strange because you're literally the only, it'd be a lonely position because you're not, you know, a normal elf. Anyway.
So many of your books for adults look at sort of tackle issues about mental health, anxiety, depression. Are these topics that you feel are important to communicate, to discuss with children as well? And have you tried to do this through your book in any way?
Yes, I think you have to talk, you know, you talk differently sometimes to adults about things as children, but that's not unique to mental health. You know, if you were talking about having a physical illness, you would talk in a certain way to a child about it, and a certain way to your doctor about it, and a certain way to a friend about it. You know, but I definitely think, I wish as a child, I had understood a little bit more about what was going on in my head sometimes. Because the trouble is, if you have negative feelings, if you don't know the language of mental health, if you don't know it's about mental health, you end up believing all those feelings. You don't think it's because your mental health is a little bit wobbly. You think, oh, it's because I'm a terrible person, or because I'm an ugly person, or because I'm worthless, or whatever it is. So you end up believing it. So I think it's always useful to talk about mental health, but because it makes people realize that these feelings aren't permanent. You know, it's a health situation, just as much as a blocked nose is a health situation, or a cough. It's a fluctuating thing, and we're all on a scale. And we all have mental health, even if we're not mentally ill and we don't have a label. We're all, you know, no one's at perfect 100% physical or mental health. You know, it's always a scale. And so, and I think it's also useful to talk about, so there's no stigma to it, because as a young man 20 years ago, I couldn't cope with the idea that I had depression, because I felt like it meant you were a mad person, and, you know, you were either sane or you were insane, you were either well or you were ill. And I had this very binary either or kind of perspective, which is wrong. I think it's very important to talk to children about these things. And I think sometimes adults are a bit scared because they've got their own issues that they're not acknowledging, and they want to protect children from everything. But the thing is, children are real humans too, and they have a lot of intense things going on, especially these days, especially, you know, with bullying and social media and pressures and, you know, parents arguing or divorces or whatever's going on. They've got a lot of things going on in their lives. And just as adults know things like grief and stress, so too do children. And so, you know, I think they want books and stories and films and stuff which deal with issues. And you obviously have to deal with those issues in a certain way. But I think that's the challenge, and that's the fun thing. So, for instance, my book about a boy called Christmas, although really it's about elves and magic and Father Christmas, it's also a story about grief. You know, it's about handling that. So I think even in fantasy fiction, or maybe even especially in fantasy fiction, it's a great place to explore those things and, you know, helps nourish us still with our own issues ourselves. I sometimes think one of the things about books is to put characters in more peril and under more stress than we find ourselves. And then we can deal with our own things a little bit better because we've got an example of a character who's going through that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do your children participate in your writing process at all? Are they your editors and critics?
Yes, a little bit. I mean, definitely with ideas, I'll test them out. I mean, when they were a bit younger, they thought some of my stories were a bit too dark. Like my daughter didn't want to read them. She didn't want a story where anyone died. But yeah, now they're a bit older, like 12 and 13, they really help me out. And my son Lucas he writes as well. I mean, he writes far faster than me. His books are like, he's written like these 30,000 word books. I mean, he's written a book recently about our dog, but our dog as a superhero. And also he's written a book called Geekology about geeks and people who are really into stuff. But yeah, no, so he's writing his own books. But yes, he does help out with mine. And I test ideas out and things like that. And they're always the first reader, yes.
Yeah, I find that invaluable because with 3 teenagers and now I'm doing a lot of young adult fiction.
Yes.
And they're always rolling their eyes at me and I know I've got something wrong somewhere.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, no, I get a lot of eye rolls. Yeah.
As a child, what was your favorite book? The book?
Yeah, I had lots. I just used to like turning the pages. We lived in the countryside. So the very first thing I remember reading was a catalogue about tractors. And I was obsessed at just turning the pages and reading about farm equipment. But, lots. Roald Dahl, Enid Blyton, all the sort of old English authors. Some Scandinavian, Tove Jansson, the Moomins, things like that. When I was a teenager, there was a book called The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, an American writer, and about teenage gangs. And what I liked about that is they weren't the normal characters you found in books. So kind of rough kids from the wrong side of town, poor kids, and yet they were into poetry and stuff. They would have a street fight and then they'd read a poem by Robert Frost, and it was kind of exciting for me to realize books could be as thrilling and entertaining as any other video game, movie, whatever it is. So that was good too. And then I started getting into sort of like scary adult books like Stephen King and things like that.
Okay. So in fact, I was going to ask you, because Enid Blyton and Roald Dahl are great favorites in India as well, of course. And in a way, your stories have the same characters as the Enid Blyton stories, but they play a very different role. I mean, you would have your trolls and your elves and your pixies, but they are entirely different. So do you think everyone thinks of magic in different ways? And what is there is a lot of magic, or that element is strong in your book, without being Enid Blytonish, without being cute.
Yes, I think magic is just, magic is about belief. There's a line in A Boy Called Christmas, which sums it up, where one of the elves, Father Topo, says, an impossibility is just a possibility that hasn't happened yet. And it's like, it's just about believing in the impossible and in hope, and that things can get better, and that ability to change. A magic trick is always about something changing, and life is full of change. So life is full of magic and hope and all those things, but it's just a nice way to
thank you. I've just got the message saying we have to wrap up, but that is a fabulous fabulous note to wrap up on, and it was an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you so much. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Matt and Shabnam. That was insightful. A big thanks to our audience for joining us today. This would not have been possible without our sponsors, Tata Steel and Tata Projects, powered by Godrej. Books by Matt Haig are available with our knowledge partner, landmarkexcite.com. Stay tuned for many more such conversations, workshops, and engagements. You can find the full schedule on tatalitlive.in.